of the Information Office of the State Council. We're delighted to be joined by the Director of the National Bureau of Statistics, Madam Liu Aihua. She will brief us on the statistics of the first half of this year and answer your questions. Madam Liu, the floor is yours. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to brief you on the basic information of our economic activities of the first half of this year. Major progress has been made in coordinating economic growth and epidemic control. In the face of the grave challenges posed by COVID-19 and the complex and changing environment, both at home and abroad, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, the nation has united to advance work at all fronts. Instructions has been fully implemented. The situation of to the GDP of the first half of this year is 45.6614 trillion, year-on-year decline of 1.6%. For the first quarter, 6.8% drop, second quarter 3.2% drop. And the value added of the first industry up was 2.6053, up by 0.9%. That of second industry, 17.2759 trillion yuan, down by 1.69%, and that of the tertiary industry, 25.7802 trillion yuan, dropped by 1.4%. Good agricultural production and sound summer harvest. The value added of agriculture was 3.8%, and the summer grain output is 142.81 trillion ton, up by 0.6% compared with the last quarter. The structure are improving. Rapeseed are growing in more areas. Milk output up by 7.9%, egg up 7.1%, meat dropped by 10.8%, and the drop contracted by 8.7 percentage points. The poultry output up by 6.8%, and that of lamb, beef, pork dropped by 2.5%, 3.4%, and 19.1%. The drop contracted by 5.2%, 3 percentage point, and 10 percentage point respectively. The production continued to recover. There are 339.96 million pigs in stock, and the fertile soil was 36.829 trillion. Industrial output are recovering, and high-tech industry and equipment manufacturing industry are growing fast. In the value added of June was up by 4.8%, 0.4 percentage points higher than May, and the growth have maintained in 3 months. The SOE value added dropped by 1.5%, corporate enterprise down by 0.8%, that of foreign and overseas invested down by 3.4%. In terms of sector, mining dropped by 1.1%, manufacturing dropped by 1.4%, electricity, thermal power, gas, water production dropped by 0.9%. The drop contracted by 8.8%, 3.3 percentage point, and 4.5 percentage points respectively. High-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing saw value added growing at 4.5% and 0.4% respectively. Manufacturing of machineries and new products are growing fast. Excavator, bulldozer, integrated circuit, industrial robot, truck saw output increase of 16.7%, 16.4%, 10.3%, 8.5% respectively. From January to May, the profit of large industries totaled 1.8435 trillion, dropped by 19.3%. In June, the PMI was 50.9%, 0.3 percentage points higher than May, and it has been above the 50% threshold for 4 months consecutively. For terms of services industry, the tertiary industry, the value added of tertiary industry was declining, but the drop contracted by 3.6 percentage points. That of the second quarter was up by 1.9%, while the first quarter was 5.2%. The value added of retail, catering, and accommodation industries was 8.1% and 26.8% down compared with last quarter. And for the first half of this, from January to May, the services industry's revenue dropped by 6.4%. The drop contracted by 2.2 percentage points. That the value added of ICT civil services grew by 8.4%. In June, the rail transportation, highway transportation, aviation transportation, mail industry, TV, radio, satellite transmission services, currency finance, and some other services industries saw their business activity index at 55%, and the market expectation index was 59.0%. Market sales are improving and online retail is growing fast. The gross sale was 17.2256 trillion yuan, dropped by 11.4%. In June, the general sale was 3.3526 trillion yuan, dropped by 1.8%. The urban sales was 14.9345 trillion, dropped by 11.5%. That of rural area was 2.2911 trillion yuan, dropped by 10.9%. For the catering industry, the revenue was 1.4609 trillion, dropped by 32.8%. And basic living products and medical products are growing fast. For the first half of this year, the food, beverage, and medicine output business revenue up by 12.9%, 10.5%, 5.8% respectively. And the upgraded products are seeing rapid growth. Sports, telecommunication retail sale increased by 6.1% and 5.8%. In the first quarter, that number was 5.1% and 3.6% drop. And online sales was 5.1501 trillion yuan, up by 3.3%. And physical online sales are also growing fast.
5. Fixed asset investment went down at a slower pace, and investment in high-tech and social sectors picked up. In the first half of this year, fixed asset investment was 28,160.3 billion yuan, down by 3.1%. The decrease was 3.2 percentage points smaller than the first 5 months. In terms of sectors, infrastructure investments down by 2.7%, manufacturing investments down by 11.7%. The decrease was 17 and 13.5 percentage points smaller than the first quarter. Real estate investment up by 1.9%, while it went down by 7.7% in the first quarter. The floor space of commercial buildings sold was 694.04 million square meters. The total sales of commercial buildings was 6.6895 trillion yuan, down by 5.4%. The decrease was 17.9 and 19.9 0.3 percentage points smaller than the first quarter. In terms of industries, investment in the primary industry went up by 3.8%, while it went down by 13.8% in Q1. Secondary investment went down by 8.3%, and tertiary investment went down by 1%. Private investment was 15.7867 trillion yuan. The investment in high-tech sectors went up by 6.3%, while it went down by 12.1% in Q1. The investment in high-tech manufacturing and high-tech service went up by 5.8% and 7.2%. Specifically, the investment in pharmaceutical manufacturing, computer, and other office supplies went up by 13.6% and 8.2%. In high-tech service, the investment in e-commerce service and application of research outcomes went up by 32 and 21.8%. Investment in healthcare and education went up by 15.2 and 10.8% on a month-on-month basis. In June, fixed asset investment went up by 5.91%. 6. Trading goods was better than expected, and trade structure continued to improve. In the first 6 months, the export delivery value of large industrial enterprises was 5.4250 trillion yuan, down by 4.9%. In June, this value went up by 1.4%, while it went down by 2.6% in May. 7. Consumer price grew at a mild pace, and producer price for industrial products went down. 8. Surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas went down, and employment was generally stable. In the first half of this year, 5.64 million new jobs were created, accounting for 62.7% of this year's total. In June, the rate was 5.7%, down by 0.2 percentage points compared with May. The rate for people aged between 25 and 59 was 5.2%, 0.5 percentage points lower than the average. In 31 major cities, the rate was 5.8%. The average working hours was 46.8 hours. At the end of the second quarter, the number of outside migrant workers was 1.7752 billion. 9. Residents' income declined at a slower pace, and urban-rural income ratio was narrowed. In the first half of this year, the per capita disposable income was 15,666 yuan, with a nominal growth of 2.4%. In terms of permanent residents, in rural areas, per capita disposable income was 21,655 yuan, a nominal growth of 1.5% and real decrease of 2%. In rural areas, the number was 8,069 yuan, with a nominal growth of 3.7% and real decrease of 1%. In terms of sources, salary income went up by 2.5% in nominal terms, business revenue down by 5.1%, property income up by 4.2%, and transfer income up by 8.2%. The urban-rural income ratio was 2.69. The median of per capita income was 13,347 yuan, with a nominal growth of 0.8%. Generally speaking, in the first half of this year, China's economy has overcome the negative impact of COVID-19 with a momentum of resuming growth and steady recovery, and its resilience and vitality has been further demonstrated. That said, some indicators are still going down, and the impact of COVID-19 still needs to be made up. Given that many parts of the world are still hit by the virus and its impact on the world economy will continue to evolve, we are still faced with growing external risks and the pressure at home for economic recovery. Moving forward, we will be guided by the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics, combine regularized epidemic control and economic and social development, be problems and targets oriented, create opportunities and make good use of them, assess and stay adaptive to changes, focus on priorities and shore up weak links, maintain stability and protections in 12 key areas, ensure policies are enforced and win the battle against poverty, complete the building of a moderately prosperous society, and ensure the sound and steady development of China's economy. Now the floor is open for questions. Please state your affiliation before raising questions. First question, please. The economy has notably picked up in the second quarter. What's your comment on the performance in the first quarter? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. From the statistics I just briefed you, we can see that although COVID-19 plunged the world economy into the most serious recession since the Second World War, however, in the face of those grave challenges, the country has united as one to advance economic development and epidemic control. So our economy is back and is stabilizing, and there are 5 areas of evidence. First, major economic indicators are recovering. In Q2, the GDP grew by 3.2%, back to the positive territory, and the value added of large industries dropped by 8.4% in the first quarter, but in the second quarter, it is up by 4.4%. That of the services industry up by 1.9%, although it declined by 5.2% in the first quarter. The overall sales see its decline contracted by 15.1 percentage points, and the decline of the fixed investments have contracted by 13 percentage points. And the value added of large industries have been growing for 3 months. That of the services production index kept growing for 2 months consecutively. The retail sales, the drop of sales contracted by 4 months in a row, and exports maintained positive growth for 3 months. So it is by no means easy for us to see the recovery of our economies and reopening of the businesses. This shows the potential of China as well as the effectiveness of our policies. Employment and price are generally stable. That is the second area of evidence. The surveyed urban unemployment rate was 5.7%, declining for 2 months, and the surveyed employment rate for people aged 25 to 59 was 5.82%, and the average working hours was 46.8 hours, up by 0.7 hours compared with last month. CPI up by 1.2%, which is basically stable, and in June, the overall price was up by 2.5%, a rather moderate growth. And also third, we have effectively met the basic needs of the people. Major progress has been made in poverty alleviation. In Sichuan, Guizhou, and Guangxi, where poor population concentrated, the per capita dispensable income enjoyed a growth between 5.4% to 7.6%. And the revenue, per capita revenue also enjoyed growth. The per capita pension and the old age care pension increased by 9.3%. The subsidy growth increased by 13.2%. And the consumption is growing fast. Food products see a growth of 12.9%, and daily necessities see a growth of 5.2%. The emerging industries see robust growth. For the first half of this year, the value added of high-tech manufacturing industries was up by 4.5%, accounting for 14.7% of large industries' value added. And in the medical industry, the investment was up by 13.6%, and the e-commerce services up by 32%. New infrastructure and relevant products are growing fast. The online retail sale up by 14.3%, accounting for 25.2% of the overall sale, 5.6 percentage point higher than last year. And market expectations are turning for the better. In June, the PMI was 40.9%, above the threshold for 4 months, and the non-manufacturing business activity index also bouncing back. So we can see that all these are good indicators, and but also we see some other indicators that are still in the declining territory. So things are still improving and recovering, and we still have to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. A lot needs to be done to see continued growth of our economy. Next question. CNBC. I have 2 questions. First, about consumption. Could you please talk about consumption in the cities, and also as COVID-19 continue to rage worldwide, what will be its impact on our economies for Q3 and Q4?
I will take your second question first. That's the trajectory of the economic development, particularly in Q3 and Q4. As indicators are improving in the first half of the year, particularly Q2, so we have the confidence for continued recovery of the economy. First of all, the economic recovery in the first half of this year will lay a good foundation for the second half of this year. Many indicators have gone up or gone down at a slower pace, which shows that the impact of COVID-19 is generally within control. And China's economy has the strong ability of self-adjustment. We have a comprehensive industrial system, improving infrastructure, and a vast market. By leveraging these advantages, we will be able to respond to the impact of COVID-19 in the following months. Second, many new business forms and models have emerged during COVID-19, which will continue to support economic recovery. In the first half of this year, distant officing, online education, artificial engineering, and unmanned package delivery have helped us to solve many problems, and new technologies have been developing rapidly. Digital economy, artificial manufacturing have formed more driving forces for our economic growth. Third, macro policies will see their effects better reflected on the ground. We have taken fiscal and monetary measures and financial measures. We have always also given priority to employment. These policies are falling into place. This will also help us to gain experience and strengthen our confidence for economic recovery in the second half of this year. That said, some problems exposed during COVID-19 helped us to shore up weak links and step up reform and innovation, which will contribute to sustained economic growth. So all in all, these are all good preconditions why we are confident of sustained economic recovery in the second half of this year. That said, given that COVID-19 is still hitting many parts of the world, and the world economy and finance have experienced many difficulties in recoveries, which has put some challenges for us at home. So we need to fully realize the complexity and long-lasting nature of COVID-19. We will take up necessary measures to complete the goals for this year. You also have a question of large city consumption. well, we will have to define what are top-level cities or large cities, and based on that, we will do more analysis. Next question, please. You talked about the sustained economic recovery in the second half of this year. If so, the expansionary monetary and fiscal policies taken in Q1, will they be slowed down or withdrawn? I also want to ask a question about the real estate investment in Q1, which has played an important role for economic recovery. So will this investment growth continue in the second half of this year? The social retail sales was still negative growth in June. What policies will be adopted to stimulate domestic demand?
For your first question, will we exit or adjust the stimulus policies introduced in the first half of this year? I have 2 points to make. The second quarter sees significant recovery, and for the first half of this year, a good momentum we can see is the contraction of decline or recovery. However, we can see that GDP, business profit, fixed investment, and many other indicators are still in decline to some extent. So the recovery we see is still mounting. And I would like to refer you to the government work report about those stimulus policies, because these policies have been moderate and they have been sustainable. They will be recalibrated in terms of the realities on the ground. So we will maintain a certain level of flexibility in these policies, and we will take into consideration our performance in maintaining stability in 6 key areas and protection in another 6 priority areas to see whether we need to adjust these policies or not. As for investment in the real estate industry and the potential for the next half of this year, we can see that the real estate investment is growing by 1.9% in the first half of this year, but we need to see more statistics such as the floor sales and the supply of land. These indicators are still declining, so we still need to see more information to and more indicators about the real estate industry. And for the social retail sale, indeed it dropped by 11.4% for the first half of this year. That means the recovery of consumption still need to be bolstered. Because of the COVID-19, some industries that involve people-to-people contact are still restricted. So there are still room for growth for those industries. As we continue to see good progress in epidemic control, consumption will be further facilitated, and with our reforms in the supply side, the supply of consumption products are also improving. So on the one hand, there are favorable conditions for consumption. On the other hand, there are also restrictive factors. The income growth are back to the positive territory. In the nominal income are back to the positive territory, but the real income are yet still in the negative territory. So there's a lot for us to do in the future. Next question. China News Service. I have a question about the index of the urban unemployment rate in June. Does it reflect the reality on the ground? And what will be the future policies?
Thank you for your question. As for the trajectory of urban unemployment rates, I think it is going down. As you may know, to stabilize employment and ensure people's livelihood, governments at all levels have taken different measures to strengthen the employment first policy, and these measures have made good progress. The unemployment rate has been going down. In June, it was 5.7%. Labor participation rate is getting close to the level of the same period of last year, only 0.5 percentage points lower. As for the furlough rate, it has also been going down. In June, it went down to 0.8%. That's about the same level of the same period of last year. So it means that there will be a small number of people who are at furloughs even without COVID-19. This number has dropped to 0.8% in June, the same level of the same period of last year. So it's the employment first policy. And the first half of this year, employment has picked up. That said, due to COVID-19, we're still faced with a large employment pressure. In the first half of this year, 1.73 million fewer jobs were created. And for some key groups, they are still faced with high unemployment pressure. First, the number of migrant workers went down. At the end of Q2, the number was reduced by 4.96 million, down by 2.7%. Unemployment rate for college graduates was the highest for years. And due to COVID-19, fewer jobs were available for college graduates. In June, the surveyed unemployment rate for people aged between 20 and 24 with a college degree or above was 19.3%. It went up by 2.1 percentage points compared with May and 3.9 percentage points compared with the same period of last year. So, are positive improvements in employment. On the other, some key groups are still faced with large pressure. So I think our urban surveyed unemployment rate has reflected reality on the ground. Moving forward, we will do required by the government work report to make every effort to stabilize and expand employment. First, we will stabilize market entities to enforce relevant policies and help them to overcome difficulties. And second, we will encourage the market-oriented employment for college graduates to better solve the problem. And third, we will step up, provide more service for employment, for local employment as well. Next question, please. with South China Morning Post. Given the flood disaster in the southern part of China, will its impact included in the GDP data in Q2? And what effect will it have on China's economic indicators in Q3 and Q4?
Indeed, we see wide business media coverage of flood in southern part of China. The June statistics already reflected the impact of the flood. For example, you can see the impact in price. The vegetables price see increase compared with both the last month and also last year. The price of some vegetables are growing by 4.2%, but the impact in some other areas are still under close monitoring. We will take into consideration the impact of flood in our later statistics. As for what will be the impact of flood on economic activity of the next year, it is admitted that the flood have disrupted production and life in certain parts. As we try to cushion the impact of COVID-19, we have gained important experience in mitigating negative impacts. Our countercyclical toolkit is still ample and effective. We will follow the situation closely in the next half of this year and adopt relevant policies in response. Next question. China mining paper. The recovery and reopening of the mining industry have provided important raw materials for our industrial production. From January to May, the profit of the mining industry dropped by about 40%, and the drop is still expanding. So what's the reason, and will there be any improvement in the next half of this year? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In the first, you said that in the first 5 months, the revenue of the mining industry went down at a large margin. In fact, there are many factors that will affect business revenues, including demand, price, cost, and etc. They will all affect revenues. In terms of coal and non-ferrous metal, it is mainly affected by price. Particularly at the international market, as you may know, there are large fluctuations in the international energy market, particularly in the first 4 months. It went down by over 30%. So the price factor has a large impact on these two sectors. As for what we expect for the two sectors, we still need to see because there are many uncertainties in the international market. With Phoenix, we think that in terms of export, the supply end is faster than the demand end. What caused this imbalance and what policies will be made to make up for inadequate domestic demand?
You indeed followed the situation closely, and that has been a widely concerned topic, namely the recovery of the supply end is faster than that of the consumption end. Let me share with you some of my observations. The COVID-19 situation have dealt unprecedented blow to our economic activity and the life of the people. Different sectors may experience the situation to different degrees, and we do not have ready experience to follow in this regard. For example, our industrial output are recovering faster. It has been growing for 3 months. The services industry is also recovering for 2 months consecutively, but some of the services sectors are still experiencing decline, for example, the catering services. It is a fact that the recovery of the supply end is faster than the consumption end. We are following the situation closely, and this is just one example of how the COVID-19 can have different impact on different sectors. And it may also affect decision-making to different degrees. The next point, the recovery of the supply end is growing faster than the consumption end. But within the supply end, the industrial output is recovering faster than the services industry. And at different stages, we see the different performances. For example, when industrial outputs are declining in certain stage, certain sector of the services industry are very resilient. For example, the software and ICT services. So we can see that some industries are more resilient than the others, and they seized the opportunity to grow. And for the consumption end, although retail and investment are all declining, but investments are bouncing back faster than consumption. That means the impact of COVID-19 is felt less in the investment sector. And of course, many of the consumption sectors that involve people-to-people contact are still heavily restricted, so their recovery is slower. There are asymmetrical recovery in different sectors, but one common thing is that all these industries are recovering, although to different speed, but they are all recovering. That's a general trend. So I think what you said is something that we need to experience in the process of recovery. And the central government introduced about 90 policies to boost the recovery of businesses. And I believe that with these relief policies, the economic circulation will be unclogged, and our economy will ultimately get back to the right track. Next question, Reuters. "2020 is the target year for complete the building of a moderately prosperous society. And the goal is to redouble the GDP and the per capita income. Will China achieve this centenary goal?
This year, we will complete. You're very interested in whether we will complete the building of a moderately prosperous society in this year. So what is a moderately prosperous society? Since the start of reform and opening up, our understanding of such a society has been enriching. We have achieved met people's basic living needs, and by the centenary of the founding of the CPC, we will build a society with more prosperity, more advanced culture, better ecological protection, and better lives for our people. So it is a comprehensive goal. Second, this society is in line with our 5-year plan. The main connotation of such a society is included in the 13th 5-year plan, and this year will be the last year of the 13th 5-year plan. And with our efforts, most of the targets listed in this plan will be over-accomplished. And third, in this year's government work report, to eliminate absolute poverty is a sign for building a moderately prosperous society. By the end of 2019, only 5.51 million people are still in poverty in rural areas. These are key groups in the fight against poverty, and the sudden outbreak of COVID-19 has greatly affected the income of rural residents and the sales of agro products. So we will keep to our set goals and take effective measures to win the battle against poverty. Generally speaking, we have laid a decisive foundation for building a moderately prosperous society. We need to enforce the measures and policies listed in the government work report. By doing so, we will be able to build such a society. Next question, please. My question is about price. In the first half of this year, price has been stable. But given COVID-19 and the flood, what will be the price like in the second half of this year? Because of the sporadic cases in Beijing, it has somehow affected the price of pork. So what will the price for pork like in the second half of this year?
As for the price level, the first half of this year saw a rather stable price level. The price increased by 3.8% for the first half of this year, and it is 1.1 percentage point slower than the first quarter. In June, the CPI was up by 2.5%. It is a moderate growth. The impact of COVID-19 and that of flood in the southern part of China have made price stability rather difficult. However, we made significant efforts to make sure that the price is stable, and these efforts are paying off. A major factor behind price increase are mainly the increase of food prices. Among the 3.8% increase, food prices contributed to about 80% to the overall price increase because the food price increased by 16.2%. In June, the food price increased by 11.1%. It is also a major contributor factor to the 0.1% increase of the overall price level. So, looking at the next half of this year, we can see that since for industrial product, the consumption and supply is in rather equilibrium level, so the food price will continue to be a major factor. The grain price will be a major factor. We just announced the output of summer grain. The summer grain is in bumper harvest, a growth of 0.9%. So the bumper harvest of summer grain will lay a solid foundation for food price stability. So there's no reason that we will see significant increase of grain price. As for the peak production capacity, we have made efforts at all levels of government to boost peak production. For example, we provide subsidies and some other incentive policies to boost production of pig. For Q2, the pig in stock has been growing for 3 months in a row. So the production is recovering gradually. However, difficulties still exist. For example, the flood, as you mentioned, has affected the production and the slaughtering of pigs. As a result, in June, the pork price was growing compared with last month. The price hike was 81.6%, while in May that was 81.7%. So the pork price didn't drop. So a number of incentive policies for production of pig are paying off. The output of pig are bouncing back. However, there are also negative factors such as flood and some other uncertainties. But all in all, the recovery of pig output are notable progress. So they will have some positive impact on the pork price. As for the impact of flood on vegetables, indeed the production and the stockpile of fresh vegetables have been affected by flood. The price of some vegetables are growing rather than declining. But the flood will be a temporary impact. While the impact might be huge for a certain period of time, and especially in certain areas, but the production of vegetables have a rather short cycle. So with supporting policies that redistribute vegetables among different areas, we believe that the vegetable price will not continue to increase, and the next half of this year will not see significant increase of vegetable price. For agro products and fruits, their price are also the growth of their price are also declining, and the declining rate is increasing. So my conclusion is that while there will be volatile prices in certain areas in certain period of time, the price will maintain stable. for the next half of this year generally? Last question. Shaman Economic Herald. My question is about employment. Employment have been mentioned in the work report for many times. So that reflects a rather huge pressure on employment. What will be the situation for the next half of this year?
Indeed, employment has been a focal point for many of us. We talked about the employment first policy, and employment is on top of maintaining stability and enhanced protections in altogether 12 areas to ensure sound employment. Governments at different levels have taken proactive measures. Second, we have seen a notable sign of economic recovery. The changes in economic fundamental will further stabilize employment and expand employment. Third, according to some of the surveys that we've conducted, business are being reopened at a faster pace, which has helped to create more job opportunities. But there are still cases in which some sectors do not generate many job openings. But with the employment first policy, with our economic recovery, and with strengthened capacity of independent development of businesses, we are confident to ensure generally stable employment in the second half of this year. Well, Madam Liu is very familiar with these numbers. That's the end of today's press conference. Thank you.